The rain tapped gently against the window as she stood there, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. The reflection in the glass barely looked like her anymore, her face sharper, her eyes holding a new kind of fire. She had spent years giving everything to someone who never saw her worth, who never once chose her the way she chose him. But now, the world was looking at her differently. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when she believed love was enough, that if she gave her heart, her time, her patience, if she sacrificed, stayed loyal, and always put him first, he would see her the way she saw him. But love, she learned, doesn't always work that way. Love can't make someone stay if they've already checked out. And love certainly doesn't change people who don't want to change. She used to be the girl who waited for his calls, who excused his distance, who convinced herself that his coldness was just stress, not a lack of care. She'd dress up, hoping he'd notice. She'd plan dates he'd cancel. She'd write messages that went unanswered for hours, sometimes days. And every time he pulled away, she tried harder, thinking, if she could just be more, do more, love more, he'd finally see her. But the truth was painful. She was never the problem. He just never valued her enough to stay. The night it all shattered was no different from the rest, at least at first. She had prepared his favorite meal, set the table, and even worn the dress he once said he liked. She was ready, hoping, foolishly believing that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But then the phone rang, and in that moment, everything changed. His voice was distant, distracted. "I can't make it tonight," he said, almost bored. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Again? There was a pause, and then the excuse came: work, a last-minute meeting, something urgent. But she knew. She had known for a long time. Who is she? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Another pause. Longer this time. And then, the confirmation she already felt in her bones. That night, she didn't cry. Not the way she expected to. Instead, something inside her shifted. A quiet kind of realization settled in. She was done. Done waiting. Done hoping. Done making excuses for someone who had never chosen her the way she deserved. The next morning, she woke up to silence. A silence that should have been painful, but instead it felt freeing. And that was the beginning. She stopped checking her phone, stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. Instead, she focused on herself in a way she never had before. She poured her energy into things that made her feel alive: her work, her passions, her health. She surrounded herself with people who saw her worth without her having to prove it. Slowly, the girl who once begged for love became a woman who didn't need anyone's validation to feel whole. And then, something strange happened. The same world that once overlooked her, that once treated her as an afterthought, started paying attention. The same men who barely noticed her before now couldn't look away. They whispered about how she had changed, how she carried herself differently, how she had become someone impossible to ignore. Even he noticed. One day, long after she had stopped thinking about him, his name flashed across her screen. A message, a simple "hey." She stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The girl she used to be would have responded immediately, heart racing, mind spinning with hope. But that girl was gone. She smiled, locked her phone, and walked away. Because now, she wasn't the woman waiting for someone to love her. She was the woman every man wanted, but the difference was, she didn't need any of them. And that was her power. But this isn't where the story ends. Because what happens when the one person who once made you feel invisible suddenly can't live without you? When the tables turn, and the one who let you go now fights to have you back. Stay with me, because this story is far from over. That message sat on her screen, glowing in the dim light of her apartment. Just 3 letters. Hey. Nothing special, nothing elaborate. But she knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't just a word. It was a door cracking open, an invitation for her to step back into something she had long since walked away from. She could almost hear his voice, imagine the way he must have typed it, hesitating before hitting send. Maybe he thought she would still be waiting, that she would answer right away, eager to hear from him. Maybe he believed time hadn't changed her, that she was still the same girl who had once clung to every bit of attention he threw her way. But she wasn't. She locked her phone and placed it face down on the table. A year ago, she would have dropped everything for him. But now she had better things to do. That didn't mean it was easy. The past had a way of creeping in, whispering doubts and memories she had tried to leave behind. She remembered the way he used to look at her in the beginning, like she was the only person in the world. How he made her feel like she mattered, like she was irreplaceable. And then, just as quickly, how that gaze had faded. How his attention drifted elsewhere, how she became someone he could take for granted. And now, when she no longer needed his attention, he wanted to give it. The irony almost made her laugh. She picked up her jacket and grabbed her keys. The night air was crisp as she stepped outside, the city buzzing with life. She had plans, that had nothing to do with him. At the restaurant, her friends were already waiting, laughing over drinks. She slid into a seat, feeling the warmth of belonging wrap around her. These were the people who had been there when she had fallen apart. The ones who had listened when she cried, who had reminded her of who she was when she had forgotten. She had come so far, and yet, as much as she wanted to pretend it didn't bother her, that text still lingered in the back of her mind. Not because she missed him, but because she knew exactly what was happening. Men always want what they can't have. She didn't reply that night, or the next, but he wasn't the type to give up that easily. A few days later, another message appeared. "I was just thinking about you. Hope you're doing well." She stared at it, her emotions surprisingly calm. She knew this game. It wasn't about missing her. It was about curiosity, about seeing if he still had a hold over her, about testing the waters. She could ignore him. She could block him, but that felt too easy. Instead, she did something she never would have done before. She left him on read. And she went on with her life. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Days later, she ran into him. It was unplanned, unexpected. A random coffee shop she had been to 100 times before, a place she had never once seen him. And yet, there he was standing in line, hands in his pockets, looking like he had all the time in the world. For a moment she wondered if it was a coincidence. But the way his eyes found hers so quickly told her it wasn't. "Hey," he said, a slow smile tugging at his lips, as if they were old friends casually running into each other. She didn't let him see her hesitate. "Hey." His gaze searched hers, trying to read what she was thinking. It's been a while. It had, but it didn't feel like it. Time had moved forward for her, pulling her away from the version of herself that had once been so desperate for him. But standing here now, she could tell he hadn't changed. "Not really. You look different," he said, his voice quieter now. She smiled, but it wasn't for him. "Yeah, I guess I am." A flicker of something crossed his face. Regret? Curiosity? Maybe both. "I was hoping we could catch up sometime." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Catch up?" "Yeah." He shifted his weight, suddenly less sure of himself. "I mean, only if you want to." There was a time when she would have dropped everything for a moment like this. When she would have let hope crawl back into her chest, convincing herself that this meant something, that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. But she knew better now. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said simply. His jaw tightened, just barely. I miss talking to you." She believed him. But that didn't mean it mattered. "You didn't miss talking to me when you had me," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The moment stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. And then, just as easily as he had let her go before, she walked away. She didn't look back, but he did. And that was only the beginning. The days that followed should have felt like a victory. She had walked away, strong and sure, leaving him standing there with nothing but his own regrets. She had taken back the power he once had over her. And yet, something lingered. Not longing, not sadness, just a quiet awareness that the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. It started small, a message here and there. Nothing desperate, nothing dramatic. Just casual words that carried weight beneath the surface. I saw something today that reminded me of you. Hope you're doing okay. I guess I never realized how much I missed talking to you. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. But the thing about silence is that it makes some people louder. One evening, after a long day, she pushed open the door to her apartment building and nearly walked right into him. He was leaning against the wall in the lobby, hands in his pockets, waiting. For her. Her breath caught, but only for a second. She wasn't scared, just irritated. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady. His eyes searched hers, the same way they had in the coffee shop, like he was still trying to figure her out, like he couldn't understand how she had slipped so far away from him. "I just wanted to see you," he admitted. She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "Why?" A slow breath. "Because I made a mistake." She didn't blink. "Which one?" His jaw tensed. He had expected this to be easier, she could tell. He thought showing up would be enough. "It used to be." "You know which one," he said quietly. And for the first time, she saw it. The regret. The realization. It was real. But that didn't mean it changed anything. "You don't get to do this," she said, shaking her head. "You don't get to leave and then come back just because you don't like how it feels now. I never stopped caring about you." She let out a dry laugh. "Caring isn't the same as choosing. And you never chose me when it mattered." The silence between them felt heavier than it had before. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I don't know what to say to make this right." "You can't." His eyes met hers, something raw behind them. "So, that's it?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She stepped around him, walking toward the stairs, her heart steady, her mind clear. She had spent too much time waiting for words that never came when she needed them. She wasn't waiting anymore, but he wasn't ready to let go. She started seeing him more often, accidentally at first. A glance across the street, a familiar figure in a restaurant. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. Then, friends started mentioning him. "I ran into him the other day. He asked about you. He seems different. I think he really regrets it." But regret wasn't enough. One night, she got home to find a message waiting for her. "Can we just talk?" One time. No expectations. No games. Just talk. She could have ignored it. She should have. But something in her hesitated. Not because she still wanted him, but because she wanted to hear it. She wanted to hear him say the words that had never come when she needed them most. So she agreed. They met at a quiet cafe, one she used to love, but hadn't visited in months. He was already there when she arrived, his posture tense, his fingers tapping against the side of his cup. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "All right," she said. "Talk." He exhaled, looking down for a moment before meeting her gaze. "I messed up." She didn't respond. "I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be there, and I was wrong." He swallowed hard. "And I know I don't deserve another chance. I need you to know that I see it now." Her chest felt tight, but she refused to let it show. "And what do you want me to do with that?" He hesitated. "I don't know. He sighed. I don't want to be the guy who only realizes what he had when it's too late. But I think I am." For the first time in a long time, she saw the truth in his eyes. The regret wasn't just words. He really meant it. But that didn't change her answer. "You are too late," she said, her voice soft but firm. Something flickered across his face, pain, understanding, maybe both. "I get it," he murmured. "I just wish I had been better when I had the chance." She nodded slowly. "So do I." The moment stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been and everything that could never be. Then she stood. "Goodbye." And this time, when she walked away, he didn't follow. She thought that was the end of it. That walking away from him at the cafe had finally closed the door for good. And for a while, life went on like it should. Days turned into weeks, and the messages stopped coming. The accidental run-ins didn't happen anymore. It was like he had finally accepted what she had known for so long: some things can't be undone. But then one night, something changed. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Silence. Then, a breath. And then, his voice. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he said, low and hesitant. "But I need to see you." Her grip tightened around the phone. "Why?" A pause. "There's something I need to say. Something I should have said a long time ago." She exhaled, shaking her head even though he couldn't see her. "I don't think that's a good idea." "I know," he admitted. "But this isn't about getting you back. It's about the truth." The truth. Something about the way he said it made her pause. For so long, she had thought she knew everything. That his distance, his coldness, the way he had let her slip through his fingers, it had all been about him not caring enough. About her not being enough. But now, standing there with the phone pressed to her ear, she realized something. She had never actually asked why. And maybe, just maybe, she needed to. They met at a quiet park, the kind of place where the world felt still, where time seemed to slow down. He was already there when she arrived, standing near a bench, hands shoved deep into his pockets. She stopped a few steps away, arms crossed. "All right," she said. "Talk." He turned to face her, eyes searching hers, like he was still trying to figure out if he was making a mistake. "I lied to you," he said finally. She tensed. "About what?" His jaw tightened. "About why I pulled away. Why I let you go." She scoffed, folding her arms tighter. "I already know why. You just didn't care enough." His head shook quickly. "No, that's not it." Something in his voice made her hesitate. "I cared too much," he admitted. "And that scared me." She frowned, caught off guard. "That makes no sense." She pulled it out without thinking, but the second she saw the name on the screen, her heart stopped. It wasn't just any message. It was from someone she hadn't heard from in years. Someone she had almost forgotten. Or rather, someone she had tried to forget. "I need to talk to you. It's about him." Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the phone. She glanced up at him, studying his face. If he knew what the message was about, he didn't show it. But something in her told her that whatever this was, whatever she was about to uncover, it wasn't going to be simple. He noticed the shift in her expression. "What is it?" She hesitated. She could have lied. Could have pretended nothing had changed. But instead, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and met his gaze head on. "I guess I'm about to find out." She turned before he could ask anything else, walking away, as her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't over. Not even close. Her hands felt cold as she held the phone, staring at the message. The past had a cruel way of circling back, just when she thought she had finally outrun it. She didn't hesitate long. Her fingers moved before she could second-guess herself. "Where?" She typed. The reply came almost instantly. "Meet me at the old bookstore." You need to hear this in person." She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see him still standing there, watching her go. But he was gone. Maybe that was for the best. The bookstore was quieter than she remembered. A single dim light flickered above the entrance, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of aged paper wrapping around her like a ghost of another life. And there, waiting by the shelves, was the last person she expected to see. It had been years since they'd last spoken. Their history was complicated, twisted in ways she had never fully untangled. But now, the look on their face wasn't one of nostalgia. It was urgency. "You shouldn't have met with him," they said, skipping past any pretense of small talk. Her pulse jumped. "What are you talking about?" The other person sighed, running a hand through their hair. "He didn't tell you everything. He never does." Her stomach twisted. "Then tell me." There was a hesitation, a moment where she saw the weight of whatever truth was about to be revealed settle in their eyes. And then, "He never let you go because he didn't love you. He let you go because he was protecting you." Her breath caught. "Protecting me from what?" A pause. And then, from himself. The words hit like a shockwave, knocking the air from her lungs. She shook her head, her mind scrambling for something, anything that made sense. "That doesn't." "Listen," they cut in, their voice low and urgent. "You don't know him like you think you do. You saw the parts of him he wanted you to see. But there's more. A lot more." She stared at them, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" A slow exhale. "I'm saying he's not the person you think he is. And if you don't walk away for good this time, you might not get another chance." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She hadn't just been running from heartbreak. She had been running from the truth. And now, it had finally caught up to her. Her breath was shallow as the weight of those words settled in. Everything she thought she knew about him, about their past, about why he had let her go, it had all been a carefully crafted illusion. Not just to spare her feelings, but to protect her from something she had never even seen coming. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're telling me I was never meant to know?" The person across from her, someone she had once trusted, someone who clearly knew more than she did, gave a slow, measured nod. "He kept you in the dark because he thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Safe from what? Safe from who? She wanted to ask, but deep down she already knew. Safe from him. She turned away for a moment, pressing her fingers to her temples as she tried to piece it all together. The way he had always seemed distant, even in their closest moments. The way he had pulled away when she had offered him everything. The regret in his eyes when she walked away for the last time. It wasn't just heartbreak. It wasn't just fear of commitment. It was something darker, something deeper. She exhaled sharply. "So what do I do now?" The other person hesitated. "That depends on what you want." That was the thing, wasn't it? What did she want? She had spent so long trying to move on, convincing herself that he had never truly cared. And now, standing here with the truth unraveling before her, she wasn't sure which was worse, thinking he had never loved her, or realizing that he had loved her too much to let her see the full picture. Her fingers tightened into fists. "I need to hear it from him." "You don't." "I do," she cut in, her voice firm. "If this is the truth, if I've been walking around carrying a version of the story that was never real, then I deserve to hear the rest of it from him. Not from you. Not from anyone else. From him." She didn't wait for their response. She turned and walked out of the bookstore, her mind racing. She didn't call ahead. She didn't send a message. She went straight to his place, knocking hard enough on the door that her own hand ached. The seconds stretched, and for a brief moment she thought he might not answer. But then, the door creaked open, and there he was. His expression shifted the second he saw her. "What's wrong?" She let out a dry, almost humorless laugh. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He stepped aside, letting her in without a word. The room was dim, quiet. She could hear the faint sound of the city outside, but in here it was just them. She turned to face him, arms crossed. How long were you planning to keep lying to me? His brows furrowed. What are you talking about? You didn't let me go because you didn't love me, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. You let me go because you thought you were protecting me. His jaw tightened. Who told you that? Does it matter? His silence was answer enough. She stepped closer, searching his face for something, anything that would make this all make sense. Why? She asked, softer this time. Why did you think I needed protecting? He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. Because I was never good enough for you. She shook her head. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. No, she said firmly. It's not. Because if that were true, you wouldn't have let me walk away thinking I was the problem. You wouldn't have let me believe I wasn't enough. So tell me the truth. All of it. He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he might refuse. But then, something in him broke. I didn't want to be like my father, he admitted finally. I didn't want to love someone the way he did, selfishly, possessively. He held on to my mother so tightly that he ruined her. He made her think that love was supposed to hurt. That it was supposed to be this constant push and pull, full of guilt and sacrifice. And when I met you, I felt myself becoming him. Wanting you so badly that I couldn't see straight. Needing you in ways I didn't know how to handle. Her chest tightened. So you pushed me away. Because I was afraid that if I didn't, I would destroy you the way he destroyed her. His voice was hoarse now, raw. And you didn't deserve that. You deserved more than I knew how to give. The air between them felt heavier than it ever had before. For so long, she had believed she had been the one who was powerless. But standing here now, looking at him, she realized the truth. She had always had the power. She had just never known it. She took a deep breath. And what about now? He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Now? Are you still running? He let out a slow, almost shaky breath. I don't want to. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the truth in his eyes. She had spent so long waiting for this moment, imagining how it would feel to finally understand why things had happened the way they did. And now that she was here, she realized something unexpected. She didn't need his love to feel whole. She didn't need his regret to validate what they had been. She had already made it through the hardest part, learning how to stand on her own. But that didn't mean she had to walk away again. Maybe love wasn't about always knowing the right answers. Maybe it wasn't about timing or perfection. Maybe sometimes love was simply about choosing. Over and over again. She stepped closer, reaching for his hand. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't let go.